Hello, Podsmashers, and welcome to another episode of
80-bit Podsmash,
where gaming goes to grab a beer. We are your hosts,
Penguin
and Termite.
I am Penguin.
I'm Termite, and we are a weekly video game podcast smashing together ideas that you care about with video games.
Shiggity, what? That's right, and tonight we are going to be talking about everyone's favorite thing in video games, which is the cutscenes. Watching the movies in the games is sometimes your only reward for accomplishing tasks.
Or it's your only thorn in your side for accomplishing tasks.
That's true, yeah. So we will be talking about that. And love them or hate them, we will be breaking down kind of like what cutscenes are and why they're important or potentially not important to video games. So
yeah.
But before we do that, we are where gaming goes to grab a beer. So what are you drinking tonight?
I am drinking for like the 8th week in a row another Sequench Ale because I have no other beer except for that. So It's Dogfish Head's Sequench Ale. It's the same sour, blissfully brewed with lime juice, lime peel, black limes, and sea salt. Delicious. It's awesome. And it's light. And you can drink low-cal and it won't get you drunk because it has 4% ABV. Fantastic.
I'm drinking my last Troganator, and it is fantastic. Doubleback.
Yeah.
Beer. It is like 8.2% alcohol, so we'll see how lucid. That's the word I'm looking for. We'll see how lucid I am at the end of this episode. But yeah, I like this beer. It's good stuff. So right. If you want to hear my more detailed breakdown of it, we talked about it in last week's episode. So
we did.
Cool. All right. Well, then we like to usually kind of update you guys with the things that are going on in the gaming world as our kind of first segment. So there's actually quite a lot of things that have been announced this week. So
there is. But first, this is the first episode we have recorded where The Last of Us 2 exists in the world in such a way we can actually play it. So first impressions, like what do we think about The Last of Us Part 2?
I so far like it. I mean, at the end of it, I haven't gotten very far into it for a lot of reasons. Number one, busy weekend with Father's Day just happened. Family coming to visit, stuff like that. Also, not to get too into it, but some people I know had a personal tragedy that we were kind of digesting and processing all weekend and didn't really feel like playing a very dark and depressing game for much of this weekend. So I'm literally very, very early in the game. I think I'm only like 2 or 3 hours into the game at this point. So, but my first impressions are Naughty Dog's basic like gameplay loop is compelling. Good shooting mechanics, good stealth mechanics, good scavenging, wandering around third person mechanics. Mm-hmm. So the gameplay loop is fun to play from a gameplay perspective. And storytelling wise, you know, it's a Naughty Dog game, so can't not comment on the story. I have some initial, I guess, concerns. Don't want to talk about spoilers, obviously. I am a little bit worried about, I think I told you before we started that I'm a little bit worried about the potential over-reliance on shock and awe storytelling.
Yeah.
But so far there have been some very beautiful moments too. Like, I mean, there's just a moment where Ellie's playing a guitar for another character and singing Take On Me. Hope that's not counts as a spoiler. That's like,
it depends. So, like, the whole idea of spoilers is like the subjectivity of what constitutes a spoiler. Some people are like, done. You just mentioned the title. I'm out. I want to be blind. And some people are like, no, just don't tell me any of the main story beats.
Yeah.
So, of course, we'll stay as spoiler free as we normally do, and that is we won't spoil a single thing about the story or give anything away about the story whatsoever in our discussion. And this is just going to be a quick first impressions discussion anyway. So, I don't think that spoils anything because you saw Ellie play a guitar in a trailer. But some people think trailers are spoilers.
And the very specific song that she sings doesn't really matter. It's not a song that you aren't familiar with. So, I mean, I'm sorry that I spoiled that she sang Take On Me instead of Holy Diver, but whatever. Anyways, it was a really, really well done, well cinematographed moment. And I enjoyed it. Yeah, made up word, totally made up word. But so it's got these very, very beautiful Naughty Dog-esque moments. So I haven't finished the game yet, so I don't have an opinion on the whole. Close. Yeah, and it's quite divisive right now in regards to fan reactions, but I can't weigh in on that yet. So we'll probably do a spoiler-filled review like we did with Final Fantasy when we complete it, if we think it's worth talking about. So yeah.
We are a family-friendly podcast, so I will not go into the rant of the internet toxicity and the trifling people of the internet that have nothing else better to do but to slander and destroy a piece of media that they have no idea what they're talking about. But anyway, my first impressions, the immediate shock value, so to speak, not referencing the story at all, but just like what I noticed right front and center was the absolutely incredible attention to detail in facial expression and emotion. I don't think I've played a game that did this that well. I mean, Spider-Man was good. God of War was incredible. It set new boundaries. Horizon Zero Dawn, same thing. It pushed the medium forward in new ways. But there's a level of polish with this game specifically that I have not seen in a video game yet. And it's just everything from, like, we talked about the Uncanny Valley last week, and we talked about how, like, characters sometimes will, like, stare off into space with Aloy. This, every single second of every person's face matters. And we talked about how, like, you bring an enemy down, if you pan the camera around, you can see Ellie's emotion reacting to her slicing the neck of a clicker.
Even just the exertion, like you see her physically exerting to try to, like get her face away from the spray of blood while she's straining the muscles in her neck to pull the knife across its neck. Like, it's very, very attention heavy in regards to the facial capture. I totally agree with that. Yep.
And then some of the reviewers were talking about how when you start to get into the game and you start killing human enemies, they've like humanified. I don't even know the word I'm looking for.
Humanized. Anthropomorphized, if you really want to get fancy, but
all right, yeah, they humanize like the enemies. They call each other out by name as you kill them. They like grief their like allies that you've just killed, apparently. And I'm seeing all that stuff play out, but it has zero effect. Like, I don't care. Maybe I'm just not as empathetic as other people, but other reviewers have said, yeah, like killing the enemies is heavy. And actually, you have to think about it. Like it forces you to think about it. You're killing people. And I know I never felt, I'm not feeling that.
See, I have
just slaying with no abandon.
I have an old college friend who actually pointed that out as a weakness in the storytelling, saying that it's the trope of, I need to feel bad about killing people. Violence is like a video game trope that's not really ever handled well and is kind of cliche.
Yeah.
So I can see that argument for sure, but again, I haven't gotten far enough to really have experienced that yet. Most of the things I've killed so far are just the zombies. So yeah, I can't really say
right.
comment
and I'm only
that.
10 hours into the game, so maybe it gets crazier as it goes on. I don't know.
Yeah, we'll see.
There's an entire enemy sect that's named that I haven't talked about. I haven't even met yet. Yeah, so that was a good 5-minute, like, boom, first impressions. We love the game so far. It sounds like you do too.
I'm at least compelled to keep playing it.
Okay.
So,
yeah, there you go.
Exactly.
We may or may not do a bonus episode with a full spoiler cast, like everything we thought about it, going through the whole story and everything as it all blends together. So look out for that if we decide we like it or not. Sorry, like it enough to do that, like we do.
And even if we don't like it, if it's got enough, like, to talk about, like, enough to break down, you know what I mean? If it will, and that maybe its value is causing discussion, forcing people to have discussions about it. So if it's worth doing that for, who knows? It may just be trash. But let's move on because we've got some more news to cover, and I don't want to spend the entire episode talking about news. So pretty much right after we recorded last week, there was a Pokemon Direct kind of thing, and so there were some things announced in that, mostly regarding the DLC for Pokemon Sword and Shield, but there was also a new game announced, and I will let you do that because you are more excited about it than I am.
I flipped out. I got extremely excited. My jaw hit the floor. I was like, yes, they're doing it. There's a new Pokemon Snap, and it's actually called New Pokemon Snap. It was actually announced, and I cannot wait. And I'm going to read a little bit of Game Informer's blurb about it. It's actually a very short blurb, and it says, more than 2 decades ago, this is Brian Shea over at Game Informer, so give him the click. More than 2 decades ago, Nintendo 64 players were treated to a new kind of Pokemon experience. 99's Pokemon Snap gave players an on-rail shooter of sorts that tasked them with photographing Game Freak's iconic creatures in their natural habitats. While we've seen Virtual Console ports of the original game, as well as photography mini-games in subsequent titles, Snap enthusiasts have been waiting 21 years for a new game in the series. Today, the Pokemon Company finally told those players that they don't have to wait much longer, as a new Pokemon Snap is in development for Nintendo Switch. The game is based on its namesake and will take trainers into islands full of beaches, jungles, and other locales to research various Pokemon, but it is an all-new game developed by Bandai Namco. Using their trusty camera, trainers will once again document these creatures in their natural habitats to fill out their Pokédex, photo decks. In addition, players will discover new Pokemon expressions and behaviors. We don't know when it will hit Nintendo Switch, but fans of the original are sure to be excited about this announcement. And dang it, I am. It's going to be awesome. The trailer is amazing.
I'm less enthused, but it is not. We don't have time to have our debate about it. So we'll save that for another week. I will say I'm a little disappointed that the game is on rails again, like the original, but it is on rails. So for those who heard that announcement and are like, ooh, new Pokemon Snap, just so you know, it's on rails. So for better or for worse.
It should be on rails.
Cool. Another Nintendo announcement was just announced today, actually, consequently, and they revealed the arms fighter for Smash is Min Min, which is great because I love Min Min. There were some couple of
that's your boo.
I know, Min Min was great. I actually liked Twin Tail when I finally got into the game. Like, when I finally got my hands on the game, I actually liked Twin Tail almost as much, if not more, than Min Min.
Gotcha.
But Min Min is still, like, Min Min was the one that I was like, I want to get this game when they revealed her back when the ARMS was first released. But, so, there was some interesting, like, it was interesting to hear Sakurai's, like, breakdown of the rationality behind choosing Min Min. And one of the, like, for one, like, the game, like, the lead developer of ARMS was like, told him, because he asked him, which fighter do you want me to put in there? Yep. And he was like, Min Min, I want Min Min, put Min Min in there. And then also he said, well, who do you think is the main character of the game? And he's like, they're all the main character. So that was kind of interesting hearing the rationale for like why they didn't choose Springman and stuff like that. There was also like a comment he made about like, I was worried that when people Google Springman, they'll see like a particular anime character. And so I Googled it.
About?
Yeah. I don't know, because I Googled it, and all I saw was pictures of Springman from ARMS. So I was like, all right, Sakurai, whatever. Because it's not like you don't have a character named Joker in the game, and when you Google him, who is the first thing you're going to see? Not the character from Persona 5, I'll tell you that much. So, yeah, it was interesting hearing his rationale behind it, but I'm still very pleased with the choice. I think Min Min's great. So, cool. That's all that probably needs to be said about that. So, do you want to hit the next one?
Sure. The FDA, the Federal Drug Administration, has prescribed a video game that children with ADHD can be prescribed with to cure it, to like help it, to treat the symptoms. Like CNN writes, the first video game-based treatment for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder has been approved by FDA. The video game is called Endeavor RX and approved on Monday, will be prescription only and aimed at children between ages of 8 and 12 with certain types of ADHD. It'll be used alongside other treatments such as clinician-directed therapy, medication, and educational programs. ADHD is a common neurodevelopmental disorder, which is usually first diagnosed in children and can last into adulthood. 4 million children aged 6 to 11 are affected by ADHD, and the symptoms of which include difficulty staying focused and paying attention and difficulty controlling behavior. So Endeavor RX device, it's a device. So I don't know if it's like, it's an app, but it's by prescription only. So I don't really know if like they prescribe you the device with the game on it, or if they allow you to have an account, or how that works. But it says the Endeavor RX device offers a non-drug option for improving symptoms associated with ADHD in children, and is an important example of the growing field of digital therapy and digital therapeutics. A doctor says, that's quoted in this press release. So that's really freaking cool. Like I listened to a new podcast as a result of the Kind of Funny highlighting Black voices during the week of the protests of George Floyd's murder. And one of those new podcasts that I listen to is called Married to the Game. It's so new to me that I'm not even familiar with the people discussing it yet. Like, I'm still brand new. So, like, the one episode I listened to, they addressed this, and they said, you know what's saving 2020 single-handedly? All of 2020, all the crap that we're going through, video games. Video games are saving 2020, and here's another example of how that's happening. It can now be used as a prescription medicine to help kids overcome ADHD.
Yeah, it's awesome to see.
Really, really cool.
It's awesome to see the kind of a government agency like the FDA kind of finally coming around to the benefits of video games. I mean, we talked about it as an educational tool, but again, as an educational tool, it also, can improve things that are also beneficial to people who are suffering from various afflictions. So it's cool to see that people are actually like studying that and working on that, and that's kind of cool. Yeah, I really that's an uplifting piece of uplifting news. So yeah, more video game direct video game announcements, I should say. I'll do the last one and then let you do that fourth one there. So reverse the order there. But they did announce that the Square Enix's Avengers game that will be coming out for the PS4 early this fall and the Xbox One will both get the PS5 and the Xbox Series X upgrades. The next gen upgrades will be free, even if you have the PS4 version. When I first read it, it sounded like they had just announced a PS5 and Xbox Series X version. Mm-hmm. And then I read it, and they were specific to say that if you have the disc for the PS4, you put it in your PS5, you will get the PS5 enhancements. So it's pretty cool. So good guy Square Enix on that one.
The 2 quick quotes from the PlayStation blog about what they're doing with it. The PS5 greatly lifts the performance and graphics bar for consoles. The new GPU allows us to increase our texture resolution, push higher level of detail farther from the player, enhance ambient occlusion, improve anisotropic filtering, and add a variety of new graphics features such as stochastic screen space reflections and contact-aware sharpening. There's also going to be that, or a high frame rate mode, which targets 60 FPS with a dynamic 4K resolution. So these are exactly, the reason why I want to read that, these are the exact same enhancements you get if you have a PS4 Pro and you buy a PS4 game and there are enhancements for it. It's the exact thing. It's what I've always been saying since the moment this whole smart delivery system came out, when they talked about Grand Theft Auto 5 at the PS5 announcement, when Cyberpunk said you'll get the PS5 enhancements, and now this too. That's going to be ubiquitous. I'm claiming it. It's you buy a PS4 game and there will be a patch that will enhance it to PS5. And you won't have to worry about buying 2 copies of the games.
Yes,
never
it
gonna
seems
happen.
like it. Well, no, because it does seem like this is a decision that's not being made at the Sony Microsoft level, but it does seem to be because we have already heard news that some publishers for third-party games will not support smart delivery. EA, I think, and Activision, did they both say they weren't going to? So, but it looks like
EA has a weird, confusing upgrade. Like if you buy Madden 21 within a certain time frame of upgrading it, you can claim the upgrade for free or something.
Yeah, I don't know. It seems like it's not ubiquitous because it does seem like there's going to be some limitations that are imposed by the publishers themselves of the third-party titles. But I would imagine
still backwards compatibility.
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah, backwards compatibility, of course. But
right. So at the worst, you can just play your PS4 game on the PS5.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yep. So cool. All right, and then why don't you hit that last announcement?
Yes. So this kind of got leaked early, but Activision, through Toys for Bob as a developer, has finally unveiled and announced Crash Bandicoot 4 is on its way. It looks so good. It's called It's About Time, and it's a double meaning, a double entendre, if you will. The game is literally about time, but also it's been 10 years since the original Crash Bandicoot game. So the last original one, sorry, it's been 10 years since Crash 3. So the idea here is they're picking up from the Insane Trilogy, which recaptured 1, 2, and 3. There's been like 8 Crash games, but they're picking up right off of where 3 left off with 4, and it's a new story. And it looks like from the video, the gameplay mechanics are all like very much reminiscent of the original Crash and how it was played out with platforming and different camera angles, and the difficulty looks like it was preserved. But the idea is like there are these 4 masks that you can get that have to do with time. And so there's a time mask that slows down time. And then there was another gravity mask. So there's like these time, gravity, and the other 2 haven't been unveiled yet. So there's different new gameplay mechanics where you slow down time to platform better. Then it showed playable like footage of you playing Neo Cortex. And he has like a gun that he uses and does stuff with. And you can play as Coco, and she does different stuff. So multiple playable characters, definitely enhanced visuals for modern gen PS4, Xbox One titles. So yeah, it looks extremely exciting. It's awesome. Go check out the trailer.
It's cool seeing some of these, like more cartoony games kind of coming. We're used to it from Nintendo because Nintendo mines its old IPs to death, and we love them for it. But, a lot of those like early Sony IPs of Crash and Spyro and Ratchet and Clank and Jak and Daxter, like those kind of fell by the wayside as the 2000s kind of transitioned more into the later part of the aughts. And it's nice to see them kind of coming back, not just with remastered games, but with like brand new entries. Ratchet and Clank's reboot, and then Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart being announced, and then seeing Crash Bandicoot 4 makes me happy. I would love to see like a Spyro 4, I guess, come out or whatever.
Cool.
It'd be cool. So,
and Sly Cooper is another one that fell by the wayside. I remember there was a time when I picked up a copy of Jak and Daxter for PS2, and this must have been like 2014, 2015. Like I had a PS4. Like I was in the PS4 world when I had picked up this copy of Jak and Daxter. And I threw it in, and I started playing it on my PS2, and I was like, we don't get games like this anymore. This is so charming and so fun and lighthearted and like cartoony and comical. Like, where was why don't we have this anymore? I remember like sending messages to friends about it, and now we're actually getting those back. Here we are, like 7 years later.
It's awesome. Cool. Yeah. All right. Well, that concludes the time. Perfect timing. 20 minutes in. No one wants to hear us talk for more than 20 minutes about news, unless we're doing an entire show about it. So, which is possible in the future. Keep your ear to the ground. But anyways, let's move on to our next segment, because alongside these fun, charming characters being our favorite thing coming back,
doing this podcast is our favorite thing.
Doing this podcast is our favorite thing. Favorite things is a segment of our show where we like to update you on whatever our favorite thing, whatever the thing we're digging, or the thing we discovered, or the thing that makes us happy this week, in hopes that you might find your next favorite thing should you feel inspired. So I can start.
Go for it. Hit us up.
There's two, and I'll be brief with both of them. But the first one is my wife and I. Hulu does this thing every once in a while where they like HBO will like put a show, one of their shows on for like a limited time, and so they put Watchmen on, and it's just perfect. Like the show, like it deals directly with like race relations. And it features the Tulsa race massacre heavily. Like it's like the first scene is the Tulsa massacre, and it's awesome. It's not the Tulsa massacre is not awesome, but Watchmen is great. I mean, I read the comic, I love the comic, and I've been meaning to watch the show. I'd heard mixed things about it back in 2019, but I'm wondering if people will look back on it now and be like, "Oh, that was kind of prescient." I mean, it literally the show features cops wearing masks over their mouths. You know what I mean? Like, it's not because of a virus or anything, but it's just kind of like the iconography of like, oh, cops wearing masks, like that. that is just like what people, I don't know, what I think of when I think what people are going to think of when they think of 2020 is like cops and masks. That's the discussions right now. You know what I mean? And this show features both of them heavily, so pretty good. My other favorite thing is I discovered a social media movement which made me crack up, and it's called Bully Millennials.
Oh, yeah, you got to tell me about this. Yeah.
It's called Bully Millennials, and it's basically a bunch of Gen Z kids on TikTok just calling out millennials for all their, like, stupid, toxic behavior. And again, it's one thing when boomers call us out on, like, oh, millennials, because, like, it's just, I mean, it's become such a thing amongst, you know, boomers have been in power for so long, and it's become such a thing of them being like, millennials are destroying this, and millennials are doing that, and we're like, hey, look, you created the circumstances which caused us to do those, you know what I mean? Like, it's one thing when, because they're kind of, you know, partially responsible for the way we are, if you will. But when it's the Gen Z kids, like, again, they're looking at us and being like, yeah, you guys are just stupid. It's like, it kind of stings a little bit more, but like in a way that's like, yeah, maybe we should be self-reflective of some of our behavior. But the quintessential example that I loved, to give you an idea as to what this Bully Millennials, #BullyMillennials movement from the Gen Z generation is they're saying things like, they'll post things and be like, who cares about what your Hogwarts house is? Like, you live in a 1-bedroom apartment. That's not the house you should be worried about.
That's funny.
The other one I liked is
we do love our BuzzFeed quiz, don't we?
Yeah, the BuzzFeed quizzes. There's one that's like, there was one that's like, how can you identify millennial? It's the person who's complaining about adulting. Just pay your electric bill, Karen. It's like, yes, we do those things. We love our BuzzFeed quizzes and Hogwarts.
Bring this up because, like, Gen Z kids are their parents are Gen Xers. They're the off generation. Like, we were not, millennials were raised by boomers. Gen Xers are raising Gen Zers. They're different. Like, we don't have any links to Gen X or Gen Z.
Yep.
We are the product of boomers. So what they've done to us is, and vice versa, is how we've always interacted. And the whole okay boomer and all that's hilarious, right? Because we're seeing new ways. We have new technologies. We're connected in new ways that we've never seen before. So, you know, like, we're doing all this stuff calling the boomers out. But I've always said the Gen Z kids are the ones who are going to get it right. Because, like, social media is in its infancy. It was in its infancy. Now it's in its adolescence. Like, social media in its use right now is the emo, like, grungy kid who wants to rebel against everything. That's how social media is as a culture. And now, like, Gen Z is going to refine that. They're going to come in and they've already, like, they're birthed into the social media realm from, like, forever. They don't know a world without it. And now they're going to, like, the pendulum's going to swing back. And what you just said is a caricature of that. And I feel like our world is going to be a better place with Gen Zers. So I actually have, and this is totally me, like, this is just Termite. Like, I have no actual evidence to back any of this stuff up. It's just like how I view the world. And so I was thinking, like, there's hope in Gen Z kids. I like them already more than other kids, like, or other generations. Like, I have hope for them. You know what I mean? Like, I can't say I like them more. That sounds bad. But when I see a Gen Z or interact with someone from that generation, I'm like, you guys, you're the future, and you're gonna change this mess.
Termite, the eternal optimist.
Yeah. And so
every generation has their strengths and weaknesses. The one thing that was funny, though, is to see millennials react poorly to being criticized. and then being like, really, one post I saw was from a millennial being like, "You Gen Z kids don't know what you're talking about. We were the last generation to like go outside and like play with our bicycles, and we also had the internet. So that makes us better than you or something." And then the Gen Z comment was like, "Look, millennials are becoming their parents, and they hate it."
It's so true.
It's so true. Great. It's so true. Good. But yeah, so those are my favorite things: Watchmen and the bully millennial movement. I'm in. Bully me, roast me. I'm a millennial, and I'm a millennial, and I deserve it. Like, please point out all my crappy, toxic behaviors.
Yep, I welcome it all.
Yeah. Cool. All right, what's your favorite thing, yo?
My favorite thing was Father's Day. It was actually kind of a weekend instead of a day, which I constantly reminded my wife, "You didn't get this for Mother's Day. I feel bad. You didn't get this for Mother's Day. I feel bad." Well, Mother's Day, we were like in quarantine, locked down, so like we couldn't do as much. Mm-hmm. But Father's Day started Friday after work. I played The Last of Us Part 2 before dinner. New game, right? Excited. It's awesome. So she kind of gave me some time to do that, took care of the kids. And then Saturday, we went to a brewery for dinner with our good friend, the Halls. They're leaving for North Carolina, so we wanted to get as much time with them as possible. So we hit them up and went to Six Bears and a Goat, sat outside, drank beer, had a meal. Fantastic. I mean, restaurants are still very new. I think I've only gone to 2. That was the second time I've ever been out at a restaurant, other than Strange Ways, I guess, with you. So that was awesome. And then Sunday was Father's Day itself. We went to church. And then when we got back from church, I said, "How much power do I have with Father's Day?" And she goes, "Unlimited, I guess." I was like, "Well, no, I'm just kidding. I'm going to play Last of Us." And in the middle of the afternoon, this never happened. Like, to set the context for this, I don't play video games around the kids if I'm home and off work. Like, if I'm in the middle of the day, that is just an off limits thing. I do not relegate myself to play video games on the 2 days a week that I'm actually here and with my kids, right? So I always do everything I can to give my wife a break, because she's got the kids 5 days a week while I work. So the weekends are getting everything done around the house that we have to get done. Plus, it's the time that I can possibly give her a break. So I never, ever try to play video games on the weekends during the day. And so she's like, "Go for it. Go play Last of Us. I'll do this and that and handle this and nap here and do all that." And then we went to my parents' house for Father's Day to hang out with my dad. And that was fantastic. They had a cookout, so we sat outside in their screen porch, all social distanced and safe and stuff. And so Father's Day weekend is my favorite thing, because we do a whole lot of little things that kind of add up to an awesome time in general with friends and family, and for myself with The Last of Us. So it was great.
I took like an hour and a half nap on Father's Day, and it was amazing. Just saying,
right?
Yeah, it was so good.
Yeah.
Yeah,
awesome.
No, it was. I mean, I had to wake up early to help set up with church and everything on Father's Day. So, like, to get catch up on sleep, I was like, "Oh my gosh, so good." So, anyways, cool. Well, then that ends favorite things, and let's squeeze in a DLC here with DLC. Stands for downloadable content. It is a discussion you wouldn't normally have about video games, and it is just meant to be fun. And so it sometimes is topical with our main topic, and this week's is. So here's how this is going to work. I'm going to pick a video game character. You are going to pick a movie.
Okay.
And we are going to decide what that movie would look like if it had been directed by the video game character I pick. So what makes it fun is we don't know. We haven't talked about this. We haven't coordinated this ahead of time. We don't have a plan. This is going to be all on the spot. So you pick your movie and then lock it in.
All right. So you say it out loud?
No. Not,
okay.
Well,
yep, I'm locked in. I got it.
You're locked in? Okay. I've got a video game character. I'm locked in. So what is your movie?
The Matrix.
If The Matrix had been directed by Clank from Ratchet and Clank.
Okay.
So first of all, it would have been a movie from the perspective of the robot. Hands down.
Yep.
Easy. Sympathetic from the robot's point of view. The main character would be a young robot who has to go into the Matrix to help keep people happy and calm while they harvest them for energy.
Yep. That's exactly it. It's the exact plot twist. I don't think Clank is very empathetic.
No.
Either. So he's kind of just snarky and responds harshly to things. So I imagine he wouldn't take any crap. And so the Matrix story, as directed by him, would be very much humans are a plague and they destroy their world, or anywhere they're a virus which,
but I think as opposed to the cynical point of view, I was gonna say, as opposed to the sort of cynical Agent Smith point of view on that, I think Clank is still ultimately kind of an optimistic character and wants to help. So I think the Matrix would be like, you humans kind of suck, but we're gonna help make you better by putting you in the Matrix. It would totally be a robot propaganda piece, yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Make you better by making us better.
But like accidentally, like it would be like, oh crap, I accidentally made a robot propaganda piece. I really truly had good intentions. I love it. Cool.
Perfect.
Awesome. Sweet. Well, that's DLC. Maybe next time we'll do a reverse, and then you'll pick the character and I'll pick the movie, and it'll be good. Yeah. I just wanted to avoid you picking Solid Snake again.
Oh, yeah. I don't know why he keeps coming up every time.
You just really need to play Metal Gear Solid, apparently.
I love Metal Gear Solid.
All right, cool. Well, again, DLC was about movies, and that's because we're talking about cutscenes today, which are, in essence, just computer-generated movies. So, that right there kind of answers our first question. What is a cutscene? To be a little bit more specific, a cutscene is a storytelling mechanism in a game. This is my definition. I'm not reading it anywhere, even though it sounds like I'm reading it. It's a storytelling mechanism in a game where basically, a cinematic camera takes over and will tell the story between the characters in the same way that a movie would, through dialogue and action. But none of it's controlled. What defines a cutscene for the most part is that none of it is controlled by the character, by the player. Mm-hmm. So you don't have any agency as a player when a cutscene takes over in order to put it bluntly, force story down your throat.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a one-way stream of story. The interactivity is removed from the player. You can set your controller down, although sometimes they rumble the controller. So like I don't set my controller down because sometimes it rumbles and it makes a loud brrr.
Yep.
Your definition was vague enough to clarify, and this is great. There's two different types of cutscenes. There's the what they call full motion video was the old way of doing it, or CGI, computer generated. I don't know what the I is. CGI?
Computer generated
image,
I think probably, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Or imaging, maybe.
Yeah, there you go. So those are pre-rendered off on the side and then inserted into the game. So there's a hard cut and you see like entirely different assets or different graphical fidelity, and you watch the thing happen. And then the other side of that is an in-engine game, like machinima, which is a new word I learned today as an entire category of medium where they take in-game assets. Fans can take in-game assets and create new movies like Red vs. Blue in the Halo world.
That's kind of the quintessential example.
It is. And Half-Life actually was the pioneer in doing this, what I'm trying to define, which is like the in-game cutscene where stuff happens to the player and you have to watch it in the engine of the game, so there's no hard cut and there's no different graphical fidelity. It's exactly the same.
Yep.
One of the examples I can pull from is Devil May Cry, the first one. Like it's a full in-game cutscene. And God of War for PS4, the entire game. There's not a single
pre-rendered
video
cinematic,
or CGI or like the cutscenes are all in-engine, in-game. So
and it's all one shot too. That's how you know. It's because it's all using in-game assets because it's all one scene. Yeah, and machinima is an interesting word because it literally just means using a video game's assets to make a movie, which could apply to cutscenes in a game, or it could apply to fan-made stuff later that uses those same assets to make a completely different story. So in order to avoid that definition, we'll probably just use the term like in-engine cutscenes. Yep. Like I think of like Warcraft 3 where it had both, right? It had the pre-rendered beautiful cinematics, kind of in between the campaigns to kind of lead to tell the story that leads between each campaign, between like the orcs, the humans, the night elves. But then it also had like in each mission, it would have these cutscenes where like, the camera would suddenly like zoom in and you'd lose all the user interface, and then the little pieces would move around and look at each other and talk at each other. And that was an in-engine cutscene. So there's also things like, what do they call them? Real time, or when you have like a cutscene, but then you're also expected to like
QuickTime events.
QuickTime events. Yeah, that's kind of a cutscene where it's like it was very popular. It's kind of fallen out of popularity, although you still see some games do it. But it was basically where like they'd be trying to marry the sort of cinematic storytelling of a cutscene with the player interactivity, and it'd be like your characters doing something cool cutscene, and then you had to like hit the circle, like the circle would pop up on the screen. You had to hit the circle at the right time, or your character would die. So it was like a cutscene that you kind of had control over, but it was, people didn't like them because we've been trained for so long, like, oh, cutscene's happening, I can put the controller down, and then you'd be like, wait, no, what? Oh, crap! Yeah. And some of those cutscenes were super unforgiving, but they were very popular in like the mid to early aughts, or early to mid aughts.
Yeah, actually, the God of War games on PS2
were
like known.
Oh my gosh, yeah, they were hard. They were so hard.
Oh yeah, they were brutal, and timing and all that. Yeah, and then Uncharted kind of took it to the next level where. I always remember the set piece in Uncharted 2, where you're in a building that collapses. The entire building is coming down while enemies are funneling into the room, and you have to run and jump and play the game with your full control of the game while a building is collapsing. And then you would have to know when to run and jump. And then it would be like a sequence of destruction around you that you just have to run using all of the in-game controls. And so it really wasn't a quick time event in the sense that it wasn't interrupting you to press a different button, but it was interrupting the regular course of the gameplay to guide you through a very linear sequence of events. And that's kind of like the true marriage of the cutscene and
the gameplay,
the in-game scenes. Yeah. So
but those quick time events still happen in games today. I think Spider-Man, the new Spider-Man, Insomniac Spider-Man had quick time events, and they're not bad. They're just, they have to be well communicated. I guess that's going to be happening because you don't want to be in a circumstance where you're like, sweet, I can relax, and then oh crap, Spider-Man just ran into a building because I didn't hit square and triangle at the same time. But so they're I think they're kind of a love them, hate them too. But so cool. So we talked about what a cutscene is. How we talked kind of about different ways in which they're made using either pre-rendered, like a pre-rendered cinematic. We'll be using that term where it's pre-rendered using a whole different CGI tool, and then there's the in assets where they're just using the assets they've already created, or in engine assets where they're using the engine and assets they've already created to just make videos out of that. I don't think there's any other way that cinematics are made off the top of my head. No. But and then so what are kind of some of the ways they're used? What how are cinematics utilized? Obviously, we talked about they're utilized as storytelling mechanisms, sometimes with or without interactivity, and that's kind of their primary function. Is we're trying to tell in most, maybe not most, but many games are trying to tell a story. So what better way than to use tried and true methods of storytelling and kind of ripping off movies, having a camera, cinematography, showing scenes, but then, you don't want to be too detached from the characters. You don't want them to always, sometimes you don't want them to always look like these beautifully rendered characters in these CGI scenes that you lovingly crafted. Sometimes you want them to look like they do when you're playing as them. So you do the in-engine ones. But what are some other ways that cinematics are used in video games? We
might touch on this again at the end of our show with our last question, but the difference in the ability to render real-time, the quality of our real-time graphics, we talked about our graphics plateau in the previous episode. So as we get closer to being able to not have to worry so much about what the characters look like, they can be used this way. And I think of StarCraft. StarCraft had these awesome cinematics. In fact, that's another Blizzard game. Blizzard was known for their awesome cinematic cutscenes.
Back in the late 90s, it was Blizzard and Square Enix were the one, or not Square Enix, but Squaresoft were known for just the cream of the crop, beautiful cinematics.
And so we had graphics engines that were not able to convey facial expressions, emotions. We had polygonal, low resolution textures, clunky looking by today's standards. At the time is what was normal. So there's two different examples I'm going to talk about. They both do the same thing. And with StarCraft, for example, you see this really cool cinematic of a marine, a space marine who gets attacked by Zerglings, but not just attacked by one. Oh no, you're overwhelmed by Zerglings. And so the cinematic of just watching that one marine, it invoked fear of the Zergling. This is a crazy alien race that can swarm you and completely overwhelm and scare the crap out of you at night. And then you go into the game engine, and because you don't have anything else in this world, you kind of subconsciously portray what's happening in the game itself with these tiny little two-dimensional sprites as you project your feelings from the cutscene you just watched onto the characters there, and you can almost, your imagination sort of bridges that gap. The only analogy I can think of is Lord of the Rings. You watch the movie, but then you go read the book, and if you haven't read the book yet and you saw the movie first, you have now projected everything you saw in the movies onto the books instead of creating your own, because your mind already has that image.
Yeah.
And so
they're kind of especially in early days of video games and kind of the growing pains of video games. cinematics would oftentimes serve as like, this is what these characters would look like if we had the technology and capacity to make the entire game look like this. I mean, Final Fantasy is the best example. Like, you know, they give you an opportunity to see what their vision of Cloud, Tifa, Red 13, all these characters look like, because the actual assets look like blocky Lego figurines. And, I mean, it's great now that we've reached the point where, like, you can, you know, technology has gotten to the point, when we talked about this with our graphics episode last week, but, like, we've reached the point where, you know, you can now play as great looking characters. You can now play as Cloud in the Final Fantasy remake the way they envisioned him originally. But especially back in the day, I like what you're saying. They're kind of used as a jumping off point to communicate the creator's vision in a way that wouldn't be possible at the time with the engines.
And Final Fantasy VII, specifically for PlayStation, did a whole new thing that had never been done before, and that is using full motion videos to alter the environment and overlaying the polygons in-engine, essentially using both full motion video CGI and in-engine assets at the same time. Yeah. And one of the scenes when Tifa was running for the Highwind in Junon.
Oh, yeah.
At the end, towards the end of the game, it's like Disc 2, at the end of Disc 2 or something, right after that Scarlet slap fight. That was embarrassing.
Oh my gosh, that was embarrassing.
Yeah, never to be.
I wonder how they're going to do that in the remake.
It'll be an amazing fight. I can't use bad words, but it'll be awesome. So yeah, that was Final Fantasy was really good at doing, like you just mentioned, the cinematics that made you could really flesh out the character's look and feel in the cinematics, and then apply that with your brain. Just bridges that gap. So the low resolution textures and the blocky polygons don't get in your way anymore. It allows you to have more of an experience. That's a way outside of just exposition through a video game story or plot advancement. You can also use cinematics for that.
Yep. A couple other uses of cinematics that I've noticed in video games over my years. And one that I recently learned about, and one that I've known for a long time. I'll talk about the one that I've known for a long time is kind of what I mentioned before at the top of the episode, is they can be kind of used as a way to reward you, with story beats when you do something awesome. Like you beat the boss, for the longest time it was always like, I beat the boss and I got to see the final cinematic. Again, I'll pull Final Fantasy VII as the example of that for me. For the longest time, I never watched the final cinematic of Final Fantasy VII.
Jeez.
Because I never beat it. I didn't feel like I earned it. So it wasn't until recently I went back. I beat Final Fantasy VII, and I was like, I finally have seen the ending cinematic. So for the longest time, I didn't know how Final Fantasy VII ended. I mean, I knew because people talked about it, but I didn't experience it for myself, because I would never let myself have that reward without taking the actual or doing the actual thing. So they can be used kind of as a way to reward you, like punctuated story beats, really intense story moments are kind of used as a reward in the form of cinematics when you do a challenging dungeon, you solve a challenging puzzle, you beat a challenging boss, boom, here's your reward. The other way that I just recently found out is that cinematics can sometimes also be used as a way to mask assets loading. You'll get to a point in the game where they need to load assets, so they'll do a cutscene, and sometimes that cutscene can be as simple as the characters are just squeezing through a tight space, and it's a cutscene in a lot of ways because you don't really have a lot of control. Technically, you're pushing the button for the joystick forward, but it is just a totally preconceived scene. And they're using that to render assets on the back end so that when you come through, you see a beautiful landscape, and they'll do that with cinematics too. I think God of War used that heavily as cinematics as a way to mask. Instead of having loading screens, they just had story beats happen. And I thought that's a good kind of example of how that can be used really well, because God of War's experience would have been completely ruined if it had loading screens, because the whole point was to have single cuts. So that instead they use cinematics as a way to be like, here, we're going to show you a little bit and have a little bit happening on the screen so that we can load things on the back end.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. One of the things you triggered me to think about when you were talking about how it's a reward mechanism is how in intense games like Resident Evil 2, cinematics are a break and a tension release for the player. So as you're going through complicated, scary environments or puzzles or these deep, heavy combat sequences where you're just on constantly for a long time, especially if it's difficult and you keep dying a lot and such, you can pause the game and take a break. Sure. You have full control to do that. But the game kind of gives you that break. But, finally I'm here. I beat this boss. I can set the controller down and just watch for a minute and still, breathe. And then if a trophy pops, then you're like me and you're like, yes! And this is the best thing in the world. You get to watch a cool cinematic and you got a trophy.
Yeah, cool. Yep, totally agree. Well, great. let's talk about kind of this may be something we disagree on. So let's break into it. But do you think that cutscenes can be either too long or too short, or too many cutscenes or too few for an individual game? And if you have examples, what are some examples? So I can...
Yeah, it's a very subjective. Yeah,
sure, yeah, very subjective. So to answer the first question, yes, I do think they can be all of those things. I think of... So I'll try to pull some examples of ones, but I think that Death Stranding is probably the quintessential example of this question, is a cutscene that is too long, and supposedly any Hideo Kojima game is subject to this.
I just said Kojima,
yeah, particular fact. I mean, literally, I told you, I knew it. I had read ahead of time that the Death Stranding final cinematic storytelling beats were like 2 hours long. And so I set aside an entire night to be like, I'm going to, like, I got to, they said, when you get to this point, this is when you have this mission, this delivery or whatever to do, this is when you need to be prepared for a 2 hour long cutscene. And so I did that. I got all the way up to that point and I saved the game and said, okay, I'm stopping. And so then the night that I was doing it, and I still ended up staying up till like 2 a.m. that night, just trying to get through it all. Jeez. Like, it was too much. It was watching a full movie. It was almost like watching a full TV show, I could have probably watched an entire season of a TV show in the amount of time it just took me to watch the end of Death Stranding. That's too much time. That's kind of what inspired this episode, actually, is like, holy crap. Like, and don't get me wrong, it was good. It was wonderful. It was life-changing. It was an amazingly well-told and well-directed story. But like, when you have a cutscene, the whole definition of it is you don't have the ability to engage a save. So like, I couldn't even take it in chunks. I had to sit through it all in one sitting.
Speaking of life changing, we never even brought that up in fatherhood. That's why. How did we not?
Yeah. I guess he is kind of a dad. Yeah.
Yep.
Oh anyway, gosh, heartbreaking. That was a beautiful example of that. But no. I mean, I cried. I like wept at that story, and part of that was sometimes at a certain point I felt, am I weeping because I'm actually moved by the story, or am I just weeping because it's over, right? So. So that's kind of the quintessential example for me. I think there are some games on the other end of the spectrum though that there are too few, or the cutscenes they do have are too short. A lot of multiplayer games these days, a lot of them not only are foregoing having story modes entirely, which is kind of disappointing. I think of Overwatch as an example of that. Like, Overwatch doesn't even have a story mode, and they have cutscenes, but all their cutscenes are like outside of the game themselves. Like, all their cutscenes are like uploaded on YouTube. So there's not like cutscenes in game.
You have to go get them yourself.
Yeah, exactly. You have to go, if you care about the story of Overwatch, you have to go find it and look into it all yourself. They release it through like comics and cutscenes, and they're doing a story mode in Overwatch too, but it's kind of like, to me, feels too little too late. Like, okay, well, now you're finally doing this thing that, like, I had an interest in the characters from the beginning. I want to know why are these characters kind of bad and these characters kind of good, and like, they created this compelling story of like heroes who were like disavowed by the public and blah, 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 blah. Like, yeah, cool. I want to hear about that. Nope. We're just going to stand to capture the flag or stand on the point or whatever the heck the gameplay is. Like, all right. So I think those are kind of the examples.
Well, famously, Black Ops 4 from Treyarch, Call of Duty did not have a single player campaign. And I love Call of Duty's campaigns. Like, I've always played, I tried to. I've missed a lot of the more recent ones, but in their heyday, like Call of Duty 4 and Modern Warfare and Modern Warfare 3 and all those, like, I played through the campaigns. I loved the campaigns. And then I played some of the multiplayer, but eventually moved on. And yeah, you're right. There's like this de-emphasis on the cinematics in some of the more multiplayer games. So Fortnite, what kind of cinematics do they have? They have a lot of in-game events that happen, but I don't think there's like, big cinematics. Apex Legends, maybe there's a little intro for each character, and that's about it. Like you said, Overwatch. So a lot of these multiplayer games, they don't really need them, though. So I wouldn't say that they're too short or too few. That's where the subjectivity part comes in. It's like, do we need them?
It depends, though. Again, if it's a Call of Duty game, I guess I don't really care. Terrorists versus soldiers, cool. Have fun. Go. I don't need a story context. I get it. You're fighting each other, but like Overwatch and Valorant and Apex Legends, by their very nature, these games, the hero shooter genre, if you will, you have to create these interesting characters. And so I want to know, how did Winston get his intelligence? How did, the medic character from Apex Legends, how did she become a medic? Like, why? You know what I mean? Like, you're creating these really rich and interesting, vibrant characters, and they deserve story. And I shouldn't have to go do homework to figure out what that is. You know what I mean? Like, it should be part of the game. Yeah, that's just my thought.
Maybe it's my eternal optimism you keep alluding to, but if there are too few cutscenes, I'm not going to notice. If there's too many cutscenes, I might notice.
Yeah.
So I can't think of a game that has like, man, this game would have been so much better if it had more cinematics in it. Like,
I got another example for you. It's a game that you don't have a lot of experience with, but Darksiders Genesis has one single cinematic that is awesome. And I'm like, I wanted them to do more, again, that whole reward, at least one at the end, you know what I mean? But literally the cinematic, and it's so weird how they deliver the cinematic. Like, the cinematic plays after, like, when you first fire up the game, the cinematic plays, again, a fully rendered, beautiful cinematic. It plays right after all the, like, developer logos, like before you even get to the main screen. It's like, and then you can skip it, obviously, but I'm like, why then? Why not at the start of the game? And then furthermore, why is there not one at the end of the game to reward me for my awesome killing of demons, And there are those in-game cinematics, but most of those are just dialogue between characters. And so that's a game that has just too few. Again, Darksiders is a very story heavy. It's not a super well, amazingly written story. It's fun and entertaining, but that's my point, is like, it's fun and entertaining. I want them to spend more time with the story and spend more time with the characters. And so, I mean, Darksiders Genesis is fun, but it has a lot of weaknesses, and that's one of them. Is just the delivery method of the story is kind of, for the most part, boring. Another kind of trend and this actually just reminded me, another trend in how cutscenes are made that we didn't really talk about, is there's a whole trend right now that's still going on, and it got really popular at the beginning of the 2010s, and that was rendering cutscenes as like comic book, like a whole different art style where it's just drawings almost. And Borderlands does it.
Borderlands,
yep. And Darksiders does it as well. Many of the Darksiders games do that as well, and that's like, I don't know how I feel about that, but it's one of those. It sometimes can be done tastefully, but on the other hand, I'm like, just do cinematics, you know what I mean? Like, you might as well. I don't know. I guess sometimes they do it as like, here's an old story from the ancient past, we're gonna give you some exposition, and so they do it in that regard. But I don't know, it can be, it's kind of gotten overdone recently, and I'm like, meh.
Some of the games that people have accused of having too many cutscenes that I loved are Metal Gear Solid 4 for the PS3 and Final Fantasy 13. And I can't say I loved Final Fantasy 13. I absolutely loved Metal Gear Solid 4. But both of those games had a lot of cinematics, and they received a lot of criticism for it. But I don't think the cinematics and the amount of them was the issue with the games. Like, I thought Metal Gear Solid 4 was awesome. Like, that's one of the 10 out of 10s in my book. Absolutely incredible. I loved it. But people are like, yeah, if you want to watch a game, and some people say it's like 20 hours of cinematics wrapped around like 8 hours of gameplay. And I'm like, I'm fine with that. I'm totally cool with that. It was fine. And then Final Fantasy 13, its issue was in general, like, gameplay mechanics and storytelling in general. And if you were a Final Fantasy fan, you probably didn't like how linear it was either. And so that kind of like, meh. Final Fantasy 13 was fine. I think it gets a lot of bad rap. I think it's underrated. It's better than what people have made it out to be, because I've heard for eons how bad the game is, and I most recently went back to play it, and I can't say most recently because I played Final Fantasy VII Remake now, so never mind. But it was the game before that I had played, and there's a lot of cinematics, and they're gorgeous, and there's a lot of in-game dialogue amongst the characters, and then there's the fully rendered, like, awesome, beautiful graphics, like, cinematics as well, as big world events happen, and that's great. Like, I love all of it. I love cinematics, so, like, I'm never going to be critic or critique or angered or miffed by too many cinematics.
Yeah.
Even if it's, like I said, Metal Gear Solid 4 is the quintessential example of that. Death Stranding, that last 2 hours did not bother me at all. I loved all of it. And I was like, I'm totally fine with this all being a cinematic. I don't need to play anything here. In fact, spoiler territory here, just a little bit. So if you don't want to hear this, it's not going to be a deep spoiler, but it could be if you haven't played the game and you're still waiting to see the ending. But at the end, you're on a beach. It's not a crazy spoiler, but you're on a beach, and you can run in any direction, and there's not really any indication as to where you're supposed to go. I thought that was horrible, and they should have just replaced that entire thing with cinematics. There's no point in doing any of that. So
no, the whole point, the only point into it was to run far enough until your character collapsed and you saw a cinematic or you saw a cutscene.
Yeah, so it's like why did you just make it a cutscene?
Just make it a cutscene, in the first place. Exactly. Yeah. No, I'm 100% with you on that.
More cutscenes would have done better in that game. So there you go. There's an example of what I was looking for. I can't think of a game that has too few cutscenes. But yeah, I always loved them. Like the reward entity is great. The imagination running wild with all the full like rendered stuff. The more cinematics you gave me, the more I ate them up. I loved all of them throughout my life and childhood of all of these games across all the platforms. Even like Link's Awakening had a cutscene at the beginning where he's on the boat in the lightning storm and like the lightning crashes and then you see Link like floating on debris and then wash up on the beach. This is a Game Boy and I'm like in love with the cinematic. And then there's like a cutscene where he was sitting on the beach with Marin, and there was a whole dialogue sequence where they were it was not even in-game rendering at all. It was a total like picture of them sitting on logs on the beach, and you can see their backs. Like the camera was down, where you could see a full like silhouette of Link and Marin. And I love that too. So, in any degree of cinematics and any kind of ways you want to tell the story, I love them. I'm all about cinematics, so you can't have too much for me.
Yeah. One final example for me before we move on to our next question, because it just came to mind. I remember I want to talk about it sooner. It's not one you can share, but Persona 5 has two kinds of cutscenes. It has, again, similarly, it has in-game rendered cutscenes constantly, and that's the meat of the cutscenes of the game, and that's fine. I love them; they're great. But it also has its pre-rendered cinematics are like straight up anime. Like they're straight up drawn. It like looks like something you could go watch on TV now or pull up on Crunchyroll or whatever. And those moments are always really like when they do show those cinematics as anime, like the anime moments. I'm like, I want to see, like those are always like really good, or not all of them, but many of them are really good character moments. And the first few are when a couple characters awaken their personas. That's like a big thing. It's like all your team members, your Scooby Gang, they all awaken their personas at various points. And most of your team members, they don't have those anime cinematics for their persona awakening. And I think that was a regrettable choice. Like, cause I wanted to see, cause like they do it for Joker and I think one other character. And I'm like, I want to see them all have their full anime scene rendered Persona awakening, and I feel like I deserve that as a Persona player, but whatever. So anyways, that's my last thing. That's one where there were too few, or at least too few cinematic cutscenes, because there are plenty of, I mean, Persona is probably mostly cutscenes if you break it down.
Yeah.
But I think that like that's an example where there's too many of one type and not enough of another. So that's a good example. So all right, cool. Then that leads us to another very subjective question, but what would be your ideal cutscene vibe, if you will? Like it could be amount of cutscenes, it could be like when in the story should a cutscene happen? Just kind of break down like your cutscene ideal, if you will.
Both PS4 games are Final Fantasy VII Remake is the most recent one. I feel like the cutscene pacing of that was perfect. The length of them was perfect. They were skippable if you wanted to, and there weren't too many of them, they weren't too long, and they didn't use much higher quality assets than the in-game engine, so they didn't really take you out of the action. There was no quick time events in there, no prompts for any interactivity whatsoever. You just watch them and then move on, and I thought that was perfect. And then God of War for PS4 would be the other, like, amazing, completely ideal. Like, that's absolutely incredible, where you have cutscenes mixed with in-game assets, no cuts whatsoever, and you don't even, like, you just in the middle, you walk up to a house and all of a sudden the camera is not in your control anymore and there's dialogue and you're like, okay, cool, cutscene. Mm-hmm. And then you're given back the control of Kratos and you move on. And like, you don't see a single frame cut, nothing changes as far as graphics. And so, those are the two examples from this gen that I can say are flawless. And Red Dead Redemption 2 would probably be another one that I can say is really, really, really well done.
Yeah, and I think what I was trying to get with the question was not so much a specific game, but just kind of like the ways in which you like to see cutscenes used. You ended up answering it anyways, so it's fine.
Yeah.
And actually, those are great examples for what I was going to talk about too, because in all of those games, or at least the first two, Final Fantasy and God of War, Like one of the things, again, I was talking about the sort of reward aspect of cutscenes. That's kind of important to me because in a lot of these games, like that's the only rewards you get, and that's fine because they're great. I don't need a chest full of loot if I've got a cool story that's being told in front of me. That's more valuable to me in many ways. But there's something about like this comes from my again my long-standing experience with MMOs, but there's something that's sometimes very disappointing about like you do this whole big fight and sometimes they're these like large scale, lots of moving pieces, you're coordinating with the whole team, and at the end of the fight all that happens is the boss goes bleh and collapses, and it's super it can be kind of underwhelming. Now granted, in those games the exciting thing is going and pressing the loot button and seeing what cool things you got, and that is the reward loop in that regard. But I will say, just from a sheer like what am I doing moment to moment, like just watching the boss go I have died, I am slain, is kind of like anticlimactic. So when cinematics are done well, it's the whole like the cinematic then gives you the like they can show the cool way the hero slays the boss or the monster and how like awesome and epic and fun it is, and sometimes that has consequences for the story. I think of like the Airbuster fight in Final Fantasy VII. Like, you beat the boss, but then it blows up in such a way that causes Cloud to be separated from his group, but then he meets Aerith as a result, and it's so like they can advance the story forward between those beats in a way that gameplay can't always do in and of itself. So I'm a big fan of cutscenes that advance the action and give me a cool action sequence to watch when a boss dies, or consequently just advance the story in a way that the gameplay alone can't. So an emotional beat, a strong, like the best, highest emotional beats, I think should be told through cutscenes, because I always think of, again, my theater background, I think it was Stephen Sondheim who did Sweeney Todd and some other musicals.
Me, man. I don't get a clue.
That's fine. He hit one of his. I think it was Stephen Sondheim. I'm gonna eat my words. My fellow theater friends out there can correct me, but there's this quote out there where one of these Broadway musical directors always used to say, when you're talking about musicals and you're talking about story beats, you're like the story beats should happen like characters should start singing when the emotions are so high that they can't talk anymore. So they have to sing because they can't talk anymore. And when they can't sing anymore, they should dance. And that's kind of like, I think of that with cutscenes too. It's like when the emotions are so high that the gameplay alone, obviously all combat should be done. All conflicts and fights should be done for the most part in gameplay. But then when the fight resolves, when you get to that triumphant moment, that should be done in a cutscene. Because you can do things with the camera, you can do things with action, you can do things with emotion and acting, facial acting and voice acting that you can't do when the player's in control of the camera and the player's in there focusing on what buttons they need to push in what order to succeed. To give them, like you said, a break and allow them to experience the emotions of the story, I think that can only be done in cutscenes. And if gameplay can figure out a way to do it well, then I guess that moves us into our next question. How are cutscenes changing? How are developers utilizing the tools to become more or less reliant on cutscenes? I think that, we are seeing, like you said, with The Last of Us, we're seeing a better detail in the ability to convey, when you do take the time and opportunity to pan the camera around, you can see the characters' faces doing things and tell those stories, even in the middle of gameplay, in the middle of stealth combat or, an intense running sequence or whatever. Like you can do that. And I think we're seeing that start to happen because we're getting to a point in technology where it's capable of it. But I'd still be hard pressed to find games that could completely remove cutscenes and tell a story effectively.
We have an example of that this current gen with God of War. And I think the next gen will see a lot more of that. Talking about how the whole idea of cutscenes are moving forward. I think the next generation, PS5, Xbox Series X and onward, we're going to start seeing a lot less use of the full motion video pre-rendered CGI stuff. I think we're going to see everything in game. I mean, we saw an entire Sony presentation where we saw in-engine trailers. Like everything was in-engine. It was all captured on PS5, and it was all cinematics. All of it. It was all cinematic. Like, in fact, that was one of the things I was complaining about in that bonus episode was we didn't get the full HUD like gameplay of each of these titles. We did with Ratchet and Clank, that was great, and we did with Gran Turismo 7, that was great. But like Spider-Man, we just saw like some combat and some cool camera angles and some action, and like that was all rendered in game, but it was cinematic. So I think that's indicative of the next generation. We're going to see that a lot more. And right now, like playing The Last of Us Part 2, the newest game, right, that just landed. It's the newest first party, probably the highest graphic fidelity on a console like you can get that we'll see for this generation. We don't know about Ghost of Tsushima yet, but we'll get there. You can see a slight upgrade between the in-game assets and the full motion video. There is a transition, and you can pick it out if you know what you're looking for, but the regular, like, I imagine the masses just don't care enough. Like, we're nerdy. If you're listening to our show, you're into games enough, you'll be able to pick it out just fine. But, like, the mass public probably wouldn't care to look hard enough to distinguish the difference, but there's an upgrade to the graphics, and you can see the cinematics separated from the gameplay, and that's just going to be gone next generation. And it is, like, how have they changed? I mean, you think about, this is, like, I was going to touch on this later, as that graphical plateau, as we hit that, look at, like, Toy Story and how it looked, Toy Story 1 versus Toy Story 4. Like, we have, even in movies, we have an increase in graphical fidelity on the CGI end of things, where it required supercomputers to render. And, like, now our consoles are meeting that. Like, Kingdom Hearts 3 was an example of showing what Toy Story looks like. And there was actual people that went out and did comparison shots of in-game Kingdom Hearts 3 footage with Woody and Buzz and compared it to the movies. And it was almost indistinguishable. It was insane. It's like, we are reaching some nuts levels of graphics here. But if you go back in time, back to, like, the NES times, what cinematics looked like, or, like, a face with a mouth that was animated and some text to read, and then the gameplay was something totally different. I hope we figure out something new. So that this is jumping into my next topic. I hope we learn something from the past where we can still appreciate a cinematic story beat that is totally different from the game, just like I described. I'm thinking of, like, a Commando game or something. It's like a top-down shooter where you just walk up and you shoot your gun and you kill enemies that are jumping out of the bushes and stuff. And then, like, between the levels, there's, like I said, the moving mouth with, like, the talk.
Yeah, it's like Metal Gear Solid.
Text. Yeah.
Yeah.
And, like, I hope that we have a creative vision in the industry, I'm sure we will, that will come up with new ways to kind of do that stuff. To, like, do different types of cinematics. So we get something totally different that we're not really used to that stands out.
Well, and there's there's the Borderlands idea where they have cinematics, but they also do a lot of the storytelling just in voice communications that tell the story while you're playing the game and give you exposition and give you character work, and all that stuff's happening while you're playing the game. And it's a voice that pops up in the corner of your screen with a little icon indicating who's talking, a little character face.
Yeah, little comms device.
Yeah, but, you know, it's a way of telling and advancing the story while you're shooting people in the face, shooting psychos in the face. And it's kind of, again, though those games still do have cinematics, it is also kind of a buck against the trend of only using cinematics to advance the story. So
yeah, I like Max Payne's graphic novels and what you were talking about with Darksiders and Borderlands, how they use the different art style entirely from the game to show, like, some story. I know Zelda's dabbled in that too. Mm-hmm. Like, you show, like, ancient scrolls and ancient text.
And again, I think ultimately it should be I think we talked about this. I'm trying to remember which episode. It was early, though. We talked about the difference between, like, this is something that we have to do because of the limitations versus this is something that we choose to do because it's a stylistic choice. It might have even been our first-person shooter episode where we said, you know, third-person shooters are getting to the point where they're just as effective in regards to creating compelling shooting games. Yeah. But the first-person perspective can be a stylistic choice, and that is still valid. And so I think that the same applies to cinematics. Like, you can take any of these cinematic types that we've described, and you could make a AAA game today with those, and it be, you know, a valid stylistic choice if that's what you're going for, because you're trying to convey a certain thing, you're trying to tell the story a certain way, you're doing it with intention. As long as there's intentionality behind it, I'm fine with it in almost 90% of the cases. It may be the wrong, you know, you can still make the wrong choice, and that's the other 10% there. But as long as there's intention behind it, I'm more willing to accept it than just like, yeah, no, we designed this game poorly, and so we had to cover up a bunch of crap with terrible cinematics or terrible cutscenes. You know what I mean? Right. I think that's kind of the opposite end of that spectrum there. So cool. All right. Do you have any final thoughts? Closing thoughts?
Yeah, I wanted to give some love to Xbox. Halo was instrumental in how to tell stories with cutscenes and a first-person shooter. Like, Half-Life set the bar with the, like, in-game rendered things that are happening, but Halo took it one step farther with its storytelling. And, like, there is stuff happening around you as you're playing the game, as you're fighting the Covenant, and then there are cutscenes that are just gorgeous and huge orchestral soundtrack and, like, I mean, Halo 1, Halo 2, Halo 3, 4 maybe, but and 5, But yeah, just lots of memories in early Xbox games. And then Gears of War was a ridiculously cinematic game, even from the camera perspective in the game. It's a third-person shooter. They call them like cover shooters. And a lot of games copy the mechanics, but it kind of started with Gears of War, where the camera's over the shoulder, and when you sprint, the camera kind of zooms, like hones in on the character a little bit. So the character's taking up more of the camera space, and like is shaky, kind of Cloverfield-esque, as you're sprinting towards cover, and like you slide and slam up against a wall, and it's very visceral, and like that tells a story in and of itself. It is very cinematic without being a cutscene, and I think that deserved talking about. So yeah, I wanted to give some Microsoft love.
Cool, fantastic. Yep. Microsoft deserves some love. Cool. Yeah. All right, well, that probably concludes our episode for the day. So we want to hear what your thoughts are on cutscenes. Do you love them or do you hate them? I think Termite and I both answered that. For the most part, we love them. But every once in a while, we're like, cutscene, stop. But
only when they're not skippable.
Depending on... Yes, we barely brought that up. Please, 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 please make your cutscene skippable. And please, please, please allow me to save. Pause and save. Cutscenes that you can't pause in the middle of. And then even take it a step further.
You got to watch it. You can't just turn it off. You have to watch it.
Exactly. Yeah. And then even further, cutscenes that you can't like save. And then it can go to the when you pick the game back up, you can go back to the beginning of that cutscene. That's fine, but it doesn't have to like literally pick up where you left off. But I mean, come on, I'm a man with a father. I'm a man with a father. I'm a man with a father, but I'm also a father with a son. I have to work. I've got a job with responsibilities. Sometimes that take place outside of work. Like I have to frequently put the game down, pause and put the game down. And so not being able to reliably be like, I need to pick up where I left off. Games that don't do that is an immediate turn off to me. So we talked about it. Yay!
There you go.
We want to hear what your thoughts are, listeners. If you have any further closing additional thoughts, cutscenes, do you love them or hate them? We want to hear. So Termite, where can they let us know these things?
If you are listening to us not on a podcast platform, we have a lot of podcast platforms, and you can find links to all of them at 80bitpodsmash.com. That's our landing page, where we have our About page and our blogs, and everything is there. It links to Google Play, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Stitcher. It's all there. If you're listening to us by way of YouTube, you can subscribe to us, and you can click on the little bell so you get notified when new episodes launch. We will always release the audio portion of this on YouTube with like a static background. You can leave us a comment right here in the YouTube video. We're called Penguin and Termite on YouTube, so look for us there. There are links to all of our social medias pretty much everywhere. We have Instagram, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. We have a subreddit, all 80-bit Podsmash, 80-bit Podsmash. So you can check us out. On Wednesday nights, we will be streaming at twitch.tv/80-bit Podsmash, so you can interact with us there. And finally, we also have a Discord. There's a link to our Discord that allows you, it's a free invite to everyone. It's in all of the show notes, everywhere it gets posted. So if you go to our website or on social media, it's all there. And I think that covers where we are on the internet.
Sweet. Next week, I should have been pulling this up when you were talking. Next week, we will be doing a developer profile, one of our series that we like to pull out, especially when games are coming out that we want to play. We are doing a developer profile on Sucker Punch to celebrate the release of Ghost of Tsushima. So it may end up being structured a little bit different from our other developer profiles, only because both of us have very little experience with Sucker Punch, and they're actually kind of a smaller...
I've played on Infamous.
I know you have. I know you did. I know. It's fine. Yeah. But they also don't have a lot under their belt, so some of our questions are, may need to be retooled in order to more accurately fit the content. So,
Indeed.
Sucker Punch, we'll be talking about it, and we'll be excited because when you listen to that episode, we'll be excited to be playing Ghost of Tsushima. So, all right, we'll see you then.
See you next week.